this is Ms. Holly from Olympia High School. We're going to use the Traditions and Encounters textbook by Dr. Bentley to study nationalist struggles in Vietnam. So first things first, let's talk about where Vietnam is. So if we're looking at Asia, most students know where China is. Here's China. And then if you look just south of China, drooping like an S, if you look at it like an S, here's Vietnam. It's next to places like Laos, Cambodia, Thailand. So this is all considered Southeast Asia. When it's south of China, it's Southeast Asia. So also this part is considered part of French Indochina, French Indochina being the area that was colonized by the French. So it's a little confusing the way the textbook presents Vietnam because it kind of goes backwards. It starts with chapter 38 telling you about the US involvement in the Vietnam War, which actually happened after this part that we're about to look at, where the Vietnamese nationalist communists are fighting for independence from the French. So let me just start with that. So the way to think about what happened in Vietnam is to think that chapter 39 sort of tells you the beginning and chapter 38 tells you the end. But to put it in context, what was going on before, we know that during World War II, the Japanese invaded Vietnam. During World War II, towards the end, we're going to see Vietnamese nationalist leaders ousting the Japanese. Then the French, being humiliated by their defeat against the Germans during World War II, are going to basically want to revive their great power status by reoccupying Vietnam. So they go back, try to reoccupy Vietnam. They lose. And then because of the Cold War, the U.S. is going to get involved in what happens in that country. And that's what leads to U.S. involvement in Vietnam. Okay, so let's look at the reading together. So first thing it does is it compares Vietnam to India and tells you that it was much more difficult for nationalists in Vietnam than it was for nationalists in India because of the Cold War. Remember, the United States has this fear that communism is going to spread like wildfire and that they need to contain it, and that other countries will become communist. So you have the US wanting Vietnam to stay non-communist, and then you have obviously the Soviet Union and later China becoming communist, wanting Vietnam to become communist. So you have basically this problem of a potential proxy war, which is what it will become. All right, so we're going to need to know the name of Vietnam's nationalist communist leader, which is Ho Chi Minh. And we'll need to remind ourselves that the Japanese were ousted at the end of World War II. They then, Ho Chi Minh then declared the Vietnamese Declaration of Independence, which was obviously modeled on the US Declaration, so that becomes an inspiration. The French, though, are not going to accept this Vietnamese Declaration of Independence. They want to regain their great power status by coming back in and reclaiming their imperial possessions. The French are outfitted with weapons that are given to them by the British and the Americans. They recapture parts of Vietnam by 1945, but the Vietnamese nationalist communists, organized as the Viet Minh, are going to continue to fight against the French. There's going to be thousands of civilian deaths. And ultimately, though, Ho Chi Minh and General Vo Nguyen Giap are going to engage in guerrilla warfare. Guerrilla warfare is a non-traditional type of warfare that tends to be very effective. And with that guerrilla warfare strategy, along with help from what had become communist China, they are going to defeat the French. So the Vietnamese people will defeat the French at Dien Bien Phu in 1954. After they defeat the French, they have to sign a peace treaty. And in that peace treaty, they agree to divide the country at the 17th parallel. So the north part would be communist and the southern part would be democratic. That said, the United States not only first supported the French, but then supported a South Vietnamese government that didn't have elections, because if they had elections, probably would have voted for the communists. And this is because of the Cold War. They don't want to see. So it's mind-boggling to students that, you know, democracy supporting America might have not supported elections. Well, why not? Because of fear of communism spreading. This idea of the domino theory, that if one country became communist, all the others would fall like dominoes. And so you have the US President Dwight Eisenhower really worried that Vietnam, and escalating the US involvement in Vietnam, because they're worried that Vietnam would become all communist. The first leader of South Vietnam was not very popular. You can call him Diem. And this is going to bring back public discontent with the government, and basically there will be communists organizing in the South, sometimes with the help of the communists in the North. And so we'll see in 1960, the Vietnamese nationalists forming the National Liberation Front They're wanting to fight against the South Vietnamese government to make it all communist. And because of that, you're going to see a Cold War proxy war emerge in Vietnam, where obviously the Soviet Union and China are going to support the communists and the United States are going to support the non-communist nationalists. In 1965, you have President Lyndon B. Johnson increasing the U.S. involvement in Vietnam. There's a bombing campaign that takes place. U.S. military forces are sent there. And as you know from other chapters, this is just going to increase the U.S. involvement. It will eventually become very, very ineffective. There will be a lot of civilian deaths on all sides, and eventually there'll be a reaction against the U.S. involvement by students and protests. Bring the troops back, and you can go back and reference Chapter 38 for that. But ultimately, the U.S. is going to withdraw from Vietnam, and then in 1975, Vietnam becomes all communist. So all of that death and war and human cost, and ultimately it became communist anyway. And this is one of those examples of the influence of the Cold War on countries trying to become, independent, the nationalist aspirations within the context of the Cold War. Okay, I hope that was helpful.